Hey guys, Evan Oric here, back with another video, and today we're going to be doing a Stendy timeline video, an explanation of the entire Stendy timeline. This is going to start from some points out of Stendy Malevolence, some points in between Stendy Malevolence and the actual movie, and the Stendy film itself, so let's get started. So our story begins in 1943, when during World War II, a renowned German scientist known by the name of Dr. Ernst Friedrich Grossmann began being popular amongst Germany and German-occupied Europe because of his famous experiments on all kinds of animals, ranging from fish and crustaceans to bigger mammals like bears and tigers. And the German government really took advantage of this. They knew his experience had to do with experiments and all that kind of stuff, so they saw this as an opportunity to ask him to do experiments on animals and beings that are a bit outside of the box, and by that I mean doing experiments on lesmosauruses and a lot of sea animals that lived during the age of the dinosaurs. And the lesmosaurus given to Dr. Ernst Friedrich Grossmann to experiment on was given, as I said, by the top officials in the German Reich. And he was asked to do this, and he ended up doing it, but he didn't get very far, and that's where our story will continue from here. Project Wutan, which was the project given to Dr. Ernst Friedrich Grossmann to see the capability of German science as far as resurrecting extinct animals went, came to a close, as in 1945, World War II came to an end with an Allied victory, and Dr. Grossmann was forced to cease his operations on the island that he was doing these experiments on off the German coast because it was now seized by the Allies. Because of this, he escaped to Argentina with many other German officials to live out the rest of his life in secrecy, and surprisingly, rather than shutting down his experiments, the Allies, after realizing what he was trying to do before the war ended, were interested by what he was doing and actually attempted to continue his experiments just to see what they could do with the lesmosaurus they had in captivity, and that's exactly what they did from 1945 until 1949, which, as you all know, is the starting year of Stendy Malevolence, Episode 1. And as previously stated, it's now 4 years later after the end of World War II in 1949, and the Americans, with the help of the British, are still doing the work that the German scientists did before them in trying to resurrect an extinct lesmosaurus creature. They then had the idea of using radiation on the hatched eggs of the lesmosaurus that they previously had in captivity, and they figured that by using radiation they could get the eggs to hatch, and boom, they would have a resurrected lesmosaurus no longer extinct. However, this idea ended in disaster, as the radiation only resulted in creating a mutated version of the lesmosaurus that was unlike the previous one they had in captivity, as this one had its own powers, its own body, it was mutated almost every which way possible, and it was unlike anything the American and British scientists were expecting. However, this island was now a British and American base, and because of the fact that this creature was now on the loose and created by accident, they had to retreat it as soon as possible. However, a mix of CIA and MI6 agents, known by their first names of Nate, Winston, Arthur, and Peter, were one of the hundreds and hundreds of people that fled the island and would be very much involved with this catastrophe as the story goes on. Although Nate, Winston, Arthur, and Peter managed to escape the island unharmed, the news of Stendy becoming a creature and breaking out of this base became full-on news, as Dr. Ernst Friedrich Grossmann, hiding in Argentina, heard of the news and was forced to escape his home there, knowing he was probably going to be under investigation for what he used to do when he was working for the German Reich. The situation only got worse, however, as Soviet forces then occupied the island now that Stendy had escaped it and now that it was abandoned, and figured out the entire history of it. They then figured that by trying to create a Stendy of their own, similar to how the Americans and British did so, they could create a Stendy that could benefit them now that they were starting to enter a Cold War with the United States. The Soviets knew that they couldn't do this alone, however, so they sent off the Soviet patrol officer, the one who located the island, to get the help of Dmitry Bulgakov, the leader of a communist organization in Britain known as the British People's Workers' Battalion. They attempted to use this organization as a puppet, knowing it was right by Loch Ness Lake, to find another Loch Ness monster so the Soviet scientists could use it and experiment on it right away. However, while this occurred, Nate, Winston, Arthur, and Peter managed to escape to the United States and were told by their chief military sergeant, known as Chief Lakin, everything that happened involving Stendy, the Soviets, Dr. Ernst Friedrich Grossmann, and then Chief Lakin proceeded to send them off on a mission to find Dr. Ernst Friedrich Grossmann so they could use him as a source to get rid of the Stendy that they had accidentally created while the Soviets were attempting to create another Stendy. They then succeeded in capturing Ernst in Argentina, where he was hiding a few days later, and brought him to a US military base in Colombia for interrogation and questioning. They were then forced to halt the interrogation, however, as Stendy, with his natural powers, or weather powers, managed to cause a Category 2 storm on Colombia, where they were forced to evacuate and take a boat to Scotland, where they planned to continue interrogating Ernst from there. However, while this was occurring, the Soviet Union managed to give the right equipment needed for the British People's Workers Battalion so that they could capture another Loch Ness Monster and give it to the Soviet patrol officer. The Soviets then knew that they couldn't reenact or do anything similar to what the Americans and British did to their Loch Ness Monster until they had someone who had experience around this field. Dmitry Bulgakov and the Soviet patrol officer then had the idea of capturing Ernst Friedrich Grossman, who at this time was already in the captivity of the Americans and the British, and was already on their boat heading to Scotland, which is actually where they were coincidentally. However, while Nate, Winston, and Peter were traveling to Scotland, they then realized that Arthur, one of their very own men and on their team, was a spy for the USSR attempting to sell Ernst Friedrich Grossman to the Soviet Union so that they could use Ernst Friedrich Grossman for their own experiment now that they had a Loch Ness Monster of their own. There was then an all-out fight between the KGB agents and Arthur against Nate, Winston, and Peter. However, while this fight was breaking out, Ernst then took his chance to escape from both sides and was chased down by Winston. Winston didn't manage to capture him in time, as Ernst then proceeded to run away and kill himself while the fight was occurring. After the fight was over, Nate and Peter were nearly knocked out, as they then began to talk amongst themselves once Winston joined in and proceeded to come up with a plan. Nate then planned to go after one of the KGB agents who escaped, while Peter and Winston would take a speedboat to the Scottish mainland so that they could meet up with them at the base of the British People's Workers Battalion and they could stop the Soviets from creating a new Stendy. Nate then succeeded in sneaking on the plane of the KGB agent he fought with earlier and managed to sneak on his plane so that as the plane was heading back to the British People's Workers Battalion, he could sneak through the base and stop the Soviets from creating a new Stendy. Peter and Winston still managed to get to the base before him, however, and were instantly killed for trespassing while Nate was still on the plane of the KGB agent he fought with, trying to get to the base on time. Then, as the plane crashed into the building due to complications, Nate managed to fortunately survive and have an argument with Dmitry Bulgakov, telling him why it was a bad idea in creating a new Stendy. However, while Nate and Dmitry were arguing, the Stendy that had already existed came out of nowhere and destroyed the entire base of the British People's Workers Battalion, killing everybody in the building and ending Stendy Malevolence Episode 5 with a tragedy for both people on both sides. However, after all these events unfolded, Stendy went into hiding and wasn't even discussed anymore in the general public until 1955, when a man by the name of Richard traveled to Scotland to try and bring back the subject of Stendy into play. Richard then continued to do his work on the Loch Ness Monster and Stendy for 8 years until he befriended someone by the name of Jack in 1963. Jack and Richard then set on a journey to find the Loch Ness Monster, who they believed was still living at the bottom of Loch Ness Lake. They then succeeded in finding one, however, thanks to Jack using his underwater probe, as they found the Loch Ness Monster at the bottom of the lake dead. Because this Loch Ness Monster was not any ordinary Loch Ness Monster, this was the same Loch Ness Monster tested on by the Americans and British all the way back from Stendy Malevolence Episode 1. Jack and Richard then realized that the Loch Ness Monster they had captured was the same Loch Ness Monster that gave off Stendy as its offspring, and warned the mayor as well as other people in the town that this was the case. Coincidentally, at this time, the Stendy from all the way back in Stendy Malevolence had returned from the shadows and had caused natural disasters across the entire world, in locations in San Francisco, Arizona, and in other areas of the United States and around the world. Jack and Richard then attempted to kill Stendy in London, but were unsuccessful due to the fact that Jack was killed during Stendy's attack in London, and the attack was halted against Stendy. After the British government was unsuccessful in killing Stendy back in London, they then set out to sea to kill him there before he would cause other natural disaster attacks. Richard, who was on the battleship at the time, then attempted to go into the ocean with a grenade powerful enough to kill Stendy so that he could avenge Jack. The grenade then detonated, but unfortunately killed him and Stendy in one blast, successfully avenging Jack, but an end to Richard and Stendy. And so the story ends, and although Stendy was killed, so were all the other major main characters in both Stendy Malevolence and the Stendy first film. What a story. Well, I'm glad I didn't miss a single thing.